gratitude in terms of the ILW workers coming to South Africa. I think it's very important to us, because we share more or less one of the same kind of history. Understand that in 1984 you led actually the very important struggle of refusing, to offload the vessel from South Africa, assisting us to fight apartheid. Right now we are free in South Africa from 1994. In as much as things have not changed so much, more especially to the workers, we're having actually these kinds of hope that, after freedom, things are going to improve exponentially and things were going to happen for the better. But in terms of things happening actually down there, more especially in the workplaces, still find your workers who are highly casualized. Most of the state enterprise companies are being privatized. Majority of workers are working on fixed-term contracts. There's still a lot of challenges. When I spoke actually to comrades into the other part of the country, we share more or less the same kind of struggles. I think your visit here in South Africa is welcome and well appreciated. And the history in terms of the role that you have played in 1984, of stopping the vessel, from your country. Not most of us people in South Africa understand or know that history. And your visit to us in South Africa to share that kind of story. In fact, if you look onto our struggles, more or less say, in 2008, I'm the one that led the struggle of stopping a vessel from China which was having armament that was destined actually to Zimbabwe. Government have issued instruction to say that vessel have to be offloaded. I led the workers here, almost next to 2,000 workers, refusing to offload the vessel. It ended up going actually back to China. That is in the history books written to say this is a contribution of workers in Durban who refused, despite the pressure that we were receiving actually from the government. Comrades, from COSATU, they were there with us, when we refused to offload the vessel. We've been also responsible in terms of refusing to offload vessel from Israel. Tusa have been part and parcel of that struggle to say this is how we do it and so forth. Comrade Callistus is working close with us, is part of our executive, is working here at TNPA, which is Transnet National Port Authority. Is going to assist you to understand the harbor in terms of what is happening over there. As I've been telling you that, the harbor of Durban is one of the busiest in South Africa in terms of loading and offloading of the containers. The harbor of Richards Bay, which is in the far north, is one of the deepest kind of port in South Africa. We've got almost around 7 ports. There's one in Cape Town also responsible for containers. There's one also in PE, which is called now Port of Ndlovu. That particular port, it's facing some sort of serious challenges. Part of the plan of the government is to privatize that particular port. Government spent almost around 5 billion in terms of building that particular harbor. So what Transnet has been presenting to us is that for 25 years, it is going to be outsourced into some sort of capitalist overrun operations. There's allegation that says, people in South Africa, they are not so much efficient, they cannot have skills, This is some lousy and stupid kind of argument. The container terminal, which is over there, is one of the places also that is facing this kind of privatization for 25 years. Plan has been actually put in place. I think there's a company from Dubai, DP World. We are told it's the one that is going to be taking over the Pier 2 and the Port of Pier 2 and the Port of Muha. We are challenging that. Workers has been, leading campaigns, to say no to privatization. There's a little bit of a very bitter history of privatization. Quite recently, there's been a takeover of South African Airways by the private companies, And a lot of the state-owned companies are facing that kind of privatization, because government is saying they don't have money, to support these companies anymore. Currently, government said I think they need almost next to 100 billion to pump in terms of the restructuring, in terms of the operation of the ports. What is very strange, comrades, is that in 2011, around 300 billion was set aside by the government in terms of the restructuring and pumping the issue of the refurbishment of harbors, the railways, and everything and so forth. When we ask from the guys from Transnet, what happened to that money? If you read the news currently, you'll see that there's been about 5 guys who are executives who are on the state capture kind of trial in terms of the misappropriation of plus minus around 500 billion, which money we think it was one of the monies that was taken actually from that 300 billion. So there's a lot of things happening and so forth in terms of corruption and stuff and so forth. As a union, we've been just fighting these things. We've been running campaigns, against the corruption and so forth. But we are going to be presenting actually papers around these particular issues to say the struggles that we shared here in South Africa are more the same as the struggles that you share in your countries overseas, in USA and so forth. So it is important, therefore, that we share one more or less the same kind of campaigns. It's important for the international kind of solidarity that we resuscitate actually those kind of things, because in 1980s, 1990s, we used to have these campaigns between unions in our country, South Africa, and union in USA, union in Britain. So we have to revamp, we have to reinvigorate those kind of struggles, because if we don't do that, we might find ourselves, sitting onto the other side of the camp of privatization, being fixed-term contracts, because the majority of workers, I can tell you, you go there in a harbor, you will find that the majority of workers who are working as dock workers, stevedoring, almost next to 100% are contract workers. Some of them are now reaching towards, the retirement age. They've never had any proper employment. They've been employed, as casual employment. This is the kind of struggles that we faced that I think in our conference we have to discuss, share some strategies on how we are going to deal with this, animal, we used to call it elephant in the house, the issue of privatization, where more or less big companies are outsourcing kind of work. Workers are being casualized, in South Africa. If you go to, sectors like security, those workers are contract workers for the rest of their life. You go to cleaning, those workers are contract workers for the rest of their lives. You go to the retail sector, those workers, the majority of workers who are working on big kind of retail shops are contract workers, fixed-term contract workers. So the challenges that we face in South Africa, obviously we'll be looking forward actually to hear in terms of our interaction with yourself, in terms of how did you manage in your country, to deal with those kind of issues. We also share our kind of experience of how we've just managed. There's been campaigns. I think we'll talk more about it, in terms of what as you are doing. But I think in the paper that one will be presenting, we'll share more information in terms of what's happening in South Africa, what has been challenges, what has been the campaigns, where have we managed to succeed, where are we not doing very well, more especially the differences, because the other kind of demon that we are facing, it's differences between unions, because we fight for same kind of membership. So instead of focusing onto one kind of campaign dealing with this employer, we end up fighting each other. and the employer will therefore succeed, because we as workers, we are busy fighting each other instead of fighting the employer and so forth. I think those are kind of demos. The issue of trade unions at the same times, I think they are being weakened. I'll come also when one is dealing with a paper. Young workers, challenges of young workers not joining unions. I think it's another kind of challenge because most of them has not been involved in terms of the broader struggle of apartheid and so forth. They think actually the issue of joining union is for older people and so forth. For them, because they're educated, they're just gone actually to university and so forth, they need not. But what we know from the fact is that workers who are united, workers who are speaking in one voice, have managed and successfully, managed to improve the working condition of workers. And I'll talk more about it, when we're just presenting actually a paper to say what we have managed in South Africa in terms of unions who are just being big, who been fighting actually for the employers, the campaign that we have just run, the success that we have achieved and so forth. But now unions are becoming a little bit actually weak. I don't know why, but I think we'll explore those kind of issues, when we engage. Why unions are so much weak? Where is that particular kind of oomph, that kind of unity that we used to see in the 1980s, 1990s, and so forth? We have to resuscitate that. The issue of the political consciousness that is lacking actually also from workers. I think it's one thing, because what we see, more especially when we examine youth, it's the issue of workers being so much materialistic, about actually, how big is your house, what kind of car that you are just driving, what kind of cell phone, latest cell phone that you are just having and so forth, what kind of style of life that you are just living. So the issue of struggle, people have just distanced themselves. They want to act as individuals. But we know from the fact that, acting as individuals, we are not going to succeed. Because the capitalists are very strong. Each and every day, they are meeting, they are strategizing against actually how to, oppress workers and so forth. What are we doing as trade unions? We're just busy fighting each other, like animals and so forth. And I think these are the things in this conference that we have to discuss, look into how do we put back again, those olden days of the unity of workers. Let me tell you towards conclusion. When I was young at the age of 21, and this, COSAT was very strong at the time. It was during apartheid. What we're taught, irrespective of what trade union you in, in your bag, you will find yourself carrying, membership form of this union and this union and this union. So you will not only organize actually for your own trade union or recruit for your own, you will also organize and recruit for other trade unions. That was the kind of unity as workers we used to have. Hence, COSAT was very strong. Hence, unions were very strong. They were very militant. And 1989, I'm happy that I was part of the Transnet at the time. It was called SATS, of leading strike. I was at the age of 21, leading a strike for 3 months. We're off, fighting with the employer for 3 months, not earning a salary. And we're happy. There was no qualms about it, that, for 3 months you are not earning a wage and so forth. These were kind of things, that we were having and so forth. We want to resuscitate that kind of spirit. Comrade, I'm known to speak a lot, but let me just conclude actually this. It was a matter of greeting you, comrade, to say you are welcome in South Africa. And I think this conference is going to be a success. And I think we are going to be sharing a lot of information. We are going to be learning from you, and you are going to be learning from us. There are other workers that will be joining us. You'll see some dock workers will be just part of this from Durban. And we'll be sharing a union-to-union kind of issues. And I think we'll take it from there. But I think this is a good start for better things. I thank you.
Thank you. Hosting this event, and of course, Comrade Steve Zeltzer. I'm holding in my hand a book called Dock Worker Power. It's by a professor by the name of Peter Cole, who's going to be speaking here in a few days. This book documents the struggles of ILWU Local 10 and the Durban dock workers in detail with respect to anti-apartheid struggle, privatization, and how these two unions, both predominantly black, ILWU Local 10 is the only predominantly African-American longshore union on the West Coast, and there is a specific history as to why that it exists. When we talk about the history of ILWU Local 10 fighting against white supremacy and systemic racism, it goes back to 1934, during our great West Coast strike, when African Americans were being used as scabs to cross the picket line. And that had been done historically by employers in order to break strikes. So they used the issue of white supremacy and systemic racism to pit workers against one another. Well, there weren't that many black people living in San Francisco in 1934, and even fewer in Local 10. But it was Harry Bridges, Henry Schmidt, and other rank and file leaders of we weren't the ILWU in 1934, we were the ILA. Along with a man by the name of C.L. Dellums, who was vice president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the first union to be acknowledged by the AFL. They went to the black community and appealed to them specifically to not cross the picket line. And in exchange for that, to be brought into the union up and down the West Coast. There wasn't any reason for the black community to accept that proposal, but they did in good faith. And as a result of that participation, that changed the strike significantly because you didn't have blacks. So I say that Harry Bridges and the founders of the ILWU realized that Black Lives Matter in 1934, long before there was affirmative action. They understood the relationship between class and race. This book is an excellent book that showed up at the Port of Oakland for the purpose of commemorating Juneteenth, which is the date that enslaved African Americans in Texas got the word about the Emancipation Proclamation. All 29 ports on the West Coast were shut down to commemorate Juneteenth, as well as to fight against privatization at the port. Angela Davis spoke that day before a crowd of 15 to 20,000, and she opened it up by saying, "We're still on the long road to freedom, and when the ILWU takes a stand, the world feels its reverberation." Now, in 1973, which is why we're commemorating that event, it was 3 years later that a rank and filer by the name of Leo Robinson, he witnessed on television the Soweto massacres. He was so moved that he wrote a resolution calling for the boycott of South African cargo in 1976. But in 1962, in San Francisco on the Embarcadero, there were a group of people that came out. I like to call them community blockades. Community people came out and opposed a South African vessel. Longshore workers did not cross that picket line because in our 10 guiding principles, we treat every picket line as if it were our own. We did not cross that picket line. But between 1976 and 1984, there were a host of things that the ILWU Local 10 did. We invited members of the ANC to come to speak. Brother Leo Robinson and his wife, Johnny, they even took in South African freedom fighters that were in the United States living underground and helped them through medical school and various other educational pursuits. But what I think is most important is this. We have a long history of fighting against white supremacy and racism. The issue concerning the anti-apartheid struggle took many shapes and forms, one of which was the Southern African Liberation Support Committee, which was the first anti-apartheid labor organization that was organized by ILW Local 10. It was people like Howard Kaler, who is still alive. He wrote the resolution calling for the boycott of South African cargo in 1984. Brother Leo Robinson wrote an amendment which says that when the South African vessel was called the Ned Lloyd Kimberley, it still may still be in operation. When that ship came into San Francisco, we would work the ship, but not the South African cargo, because we didn't have a quarrel with other countries' cargo being on that vessel. So it made it very strategic. And I would like to say that Steve Zelser has done a wonderful job of chronicling that struggle on video, and I hope everyone will get a chance to see it. But I'd just like to close with this. Peter Cole points out that dock workers have the greatest leverage of any workers in the world with regards to their being at the point of production for the global supply chain. And when we shut down, everything is affected. Yes. Rail schedules, trucking schedules, flight schedules carrying cargo. The food that we eat, cars and the fuel that we put into them, the computers, handheld devices, the shoes that we wear, all come off of a ship. And I like to think, and it's not just my point of view, there are no workers in the world that understand capitalism better than longshore workers. Because before that cargo can be merchandised and sold in stores, it has to come off that ship. And if we don't unload it or load it, it does not happen. And I think that that's one of the main reasons why we are here. One of the brothers that is here, Brother Damon, he tied up one of the vessels that's here today. And I used to be on the line board. That's why I'm wearing this lineman's hat. So the universality of our employers and the work that we do. And I maintain that there aren't any workers in the world that have the swagger and arrogance of longshore workers. And that's for a reason. We're responsible for making the ports productive, safe, and efficient. It's all because of us. So, Brother Joseph, you say you're long-winded? I'm more long-winded than you, but I'm going to cut it off. But thank you, everyone.
To introduce Jabu, I started actually in the docks, but when it came to struggle, there were the textiles, there was the frame group, there were the clothing workers, there were the metal workers with Alusaf and aluminium in Pietermaritzburg, there were furniture workers, and every single group of workers in South Africa, particularly in Durban, was becoming active. We even had seamen who would walk in suits and ties. They called them Zulu seamen. They may have been Zulu, they may have been not, but they were very proud workers, and we were very proud to work with them. But I have to mention June Rose Nala, the mother of Jabu, who very unfortunately is not able to be here. She's just had a stroke, and she is not in a very good condition. Although if I give her a call, she will tell me, Dave, come here now, I want to talk to you. So she does spring back every so often, and I miss her spirit, and her spirit is captured here in Jabu. Her mother, June Rose, was the most active woman weaver in South Africa. Beware, beware, beware. The male weaver who thought that he could trip up June and give her, I think they would take her blankets and put their rubbishy blankets in, all kinds of tricks that would be played on her. And I'm trying to remember the name of the manager who dared to call her up and tell her off. He got such a hiding from June Rose. Remember, this is apartheid. This is a white boss. And June Rose was one of the first black women on the looms. And she gave him such lip, I think he actually said sorry. So she was a fighter par excellence. Of course, with that reputation, she didn't last too long, because eventually the frame group was a big monopoly and they worked her out. But we were only pleased to have her in the textile union. She led that union. And she was the first General Secretary of the Metal and Allied Workers Union, which is now NUMSA, which is the most powerful union in South Africa. So all strength to June Rose. We remember you right now. We will never forget you, June, no matter what. And if I dare say, Jabu carries that spirit. If you just chat a bit, you'll also find there's some corrections from Jabu too. But there's also that fiery spirit. I visited a place you would never think that there was a South African born black political representative. Let me just suggest a name like Oxford, Academic Oxford. Do you think that would happen? She's there. She's one of the strident fighters in the Labour Party against the right wing, fighting for a living wage in Oxford, organizing those people called minorities or black, blah, 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 all the different groups that are divided out in British society, and organizing them and actually getting somewhere and trying to bring down the Rhodes statue, or the Rhodes head, actually. She's been fighting to do that, I think now for 7 years or longer. Longer. Yeah. We've been working to do that. Why should we have the arch-imperialist Rhodes, who took so much money from the sweat of black workers in South Africa and enriched Oxford, and then have his name still up there, and still in South Africa too. Now they usually add Mandela, Rhodes Mandela, seem to try and soften the blow. But Jabu is fighting that cause, and I think sometimes they covered it up, but it's not gone. It's still there, and it's a shame. It's not as though the people of Oxford are defending it. It's that the last remnants of the elite, the establishment in Oxford, think of every legal trick to make sure that that statue doesn't go. We want to cleanse that place called Oxford. It's a great repository of knowledge. It's a great place for research right now. There's all kinds of latest scientific and medical research going on in Oxford. Jabu can tell you more about that. We want to build on the creativity and the mental ability of people of all kinds and types. You'll find every single type of person from all around the world in Oxford, even though it's a quiet little place, and having a productive life. So Jabu, I want to welcome you home. Okay. At least for this time. There's family here too to be welcomed. You're welcome indeed. And I also want to thank Nise again. Nise, you are with us all the way. You're with us. When I come back to South Africa, maybe I haven't seen Nise for 20 years maybe. I'm living now, well, it's a long story, I'll keep it very, very short, but I married an American woman, all right? So there I am, somewhere near Boston, all right? I come back to South Africa, I come into Bat Center, and Nise doesn't even greet me, just say, sit down, Dad, we've got these things to do. We're back to square one, as we were in early 1990s and 2000 and elsewhere. Nise, you're bringing life to the Bat Center. This was a military establishment. This is a place I never came to, because I was one of those guys who wasn't in favor of the military. I wasn't in favor of the imprisonment of black people who fought against then colonialism. Bambata, all praise to his name, one of the chiefs who fought against the head tax. Every black male had to pay head tax. And he fought against this, and now you can see the remains are taken to the prison where all those prisoners are kept, and this harbour was built with their labour. This harbour was built with their labour. And all respect, I've got pictures, I'll show you in the photographic exhibition of those workers working away. I've also been up on the bluff. If you look up there, and you see our lighthouse there, that was my job when I was in the army to secure that lighthouse and the guns. I knew there was nothing when they said there was terrorism and blah, blah, blah. I thought, guys, you really need your head straight. I would fall asleep on guard duty, and the night watchman then would turn the searchlight into my eyes, wake me up and make me stand up again. But that centre there was a centre of destabilization. The attacks on Mozambique, on Lesotho, on Angola were all organized from up there. I've been up there and I've seen it with my eyes. I know C Company. I was in C Company. I know everything about it. And now I see all of that development there to destroy Africa. Right here in Durban. It's not a sign. There's no museum. There's nothing to say. You have to go to books to see it. But maybe it's one of the things we would see. It's actually a very beautiful place. Your criteria is to see the beauty of Durban. I welcome you all to Durban. With the blood, sweat and tears, the workers have created this place. With the ingenuity of scientists and engineers, we built this place. And one last confession. I'm born in Durban because my father was brought here by the Royal Navy to build that place over there called Salisbury Island, that naval centre. I've never been to that naval centre because I feel the shame of it. Why should my father have done that? We were in very good terms, but it was something I never wanted to see that, and to myself to be forced, because every white-skinned male had to go into the army, either that or prison, right? So that was it. I lived and I've developed in this country. I've fought for the dock workers in the 1970s. I've spent time in prison in this country. I've been called a communist and then not allowed to go to the university, not allowed to teach, not allowed to write. And eventually I had nothing to do, although my mother was very happy for the first time she's got a son at home. I actually didn't want to live my life all that time. She was marvelous when it came to the secret police. She would give them such a hiding. She would read out the Old Testament about what happens to evil people and how they rot in hell. I've never seen a shaking secret policeman. She could do it. She would tell them to their face, you know, what was going on. We know nothing of these people. They've all vanished. There are no prosecutions. I don't know who these people are, who I can remember them, the name, the Eternal Steenkamp, and all those people that gave us such a hard time, that beat our people, that beat Joseph and Ndlovu to death. It's all past, somehow. Maybe because people just say, oh, well, we had some problems on our side, so maybe you had some problems, so let's just forgive and forget. To forget, you have to know what you're forgetting.
Right. Yes.
To forgive, you have to know exactly what you're forgiving.
That's right.
I am born in this place. I've grown up with all the white privileges. Not in my name.
Yes.
Have you done that? Not in my name. Have you shut down workers? Have you imprisoned them? Have you destroyed our unions? At that time, we've rebuilt since then. And have you killed some of the most marvelous people in this country who fought in Mpopomeni in the multinational there, BTR, who fought there and been destroyed. And I want to pay there was always a last honor to someone called Barney Gladler. You know, among black politicians at that time, there wasn't much room to maneuver. People were all thinking, oh, well, we've got to fit in somehow, we can do something. Barney was somebody who was allocated to work with the unions. Now, I thought this would never work. But you know, you must never prejudge a person. You must never say, because you come from here, we know you already. All I know is that when I picked up the phone, and I would speak to one person called Barney Bladler, and he would come there with a government card, ZG. He would come there and he would say, Dave,
Zulu government.
Zulu government, what are we to do? What do you want me to do? I said, Barney, please, we're in trouble. We're losing the strike. They've let the dogs loose on the workers. The women are imprisoned here. We lost 257 in prison. The people are running because now the dogs are at their throats. Please, we've got to reform this, bring the workers together. You'll see the pictures of Barney Bladler. All honor to Barney Bladler. He fought with us. He only had one lung. He was a weak person. If you look at him, he actually was quite a handsome man. But he actually only had one lung, and he was suffering all the time because he was always coughing. He only lasted till 1977, but he fought with us to the end. And when the end came, when the regime, that was the Zulu government regime, the Bantustan regime, fired him. Why? Because he was on the side of the workers. That regime had to get the money from the government and from the bosses. It had to put people there in the harbour who would be under their control. If you were speaking out your Bakboswa, you'd be chased away. You would not be allowed to organize a union. They'd make your life a misery, and they'd kick you out of the city, and they would write on your pass identity document not to return to Durban for these reasons. It was that was a terrible thing, because you could never have a chance to get another job in the city. So they tried to destroy it. They tried to destroy the skills, the talents of black stevedores, of those that can operate the winches, and I will introduce them to you. Phyllis is so pleased to have you here too, and be able to talk about that. We have the pride of being able to do a job properly. I heard that pride in the way in which we've been speaking now. We want to build on this. It's not just a history of tears. We've moved on to achievements of many a kind, but we are not going to take our society forward and America forward, the labor movement in America forward, unless we have this integration, unless we have this dialogue and this talking, unless we learn from each other, not just a few little things, but actually some really big things. Because my belief, and that was from a boy, when I could see the energy and the strength of the black workers around me, that these people can build a country. Now with the education, the training, and the political experience, we can rule a country. Not the rich, not the combines, not the private agencies. Some appear quite nice, and maybe they're black brothers, but okay, all right. But no, our own people.
Why black brothers?
PEE, okay, we have all ways of making companies now. But that is the way we can build. We have the strength, we have the intelligence, we have the international links to make a success of this country, of Southern Africa, which has been burnt by colonialism. And we are still rising, right? And internationally, and we look forward to working with you guys. Amandla!
For that introduction. I am so proud of this Durban movement. I'm so proud to have come to this country to come and represent such a marvelous history in the workers' struggle. I was 3 at the time when my mom took on the most dangerous, violent regime that has ever existed in our history. Apartheid was not a child's play. Opposing apartheid meant that they were killed, they were tortured, they were imprisoned. My mother faced so many of those years in detention. But one of the things that I've always be proud of my mother will manage to make that period sound so seductive. You'd wish that you had fought in that era. They were so resistant, they were so resilient about their strike, about their struggle. So when I took on my political life in England, I had to obviously consult my mother and say, Mom, do you think I'm ready for this? And she said, who else if it's not my daughter? Incidentally, when David mentioned Bambata, I'm a direct descendant. My mother's a direct descendant of Bambata. So basically the power to resist oppressive powers it's becoming a heredity. So my role here is to come and really just share some of my mother's stories of what it was like to organize in those days. One of the things that my mother told me about leading Mawu, she said when she inherited Mawu, it only had 10 rands. 10 rands. And when she led Mawu to one of the most powerful trade unions in South Africa, which later became Nise, became the second largest union in South Africa. She talks about the struggles that they had as women. As you can see in this 1973, as we say, this story is missing in the South African history. But this story is so powerful because prior to 1973, there was a huge vacuum because most of the political resistance in South Africa had been shut down. We're talking about the Rivonia tribe. We're talking about Sharpeville. We're talking about all those great struggles that were silenced until the rise of 1973, which was a prelude to the 1976 Soweto uprising. So 1973 was powerful. It was powerful also from the point of view of the workers of South Africa taking power and standing up for themselves. Taking power and being aware of their own autonomy. But one of the most powerful things that my mother used to project about that period, she brought the culture of Zulus into the mix. She would say, of course I would ask her, Mom, how did you manage to organize? Because in this day and age, when we have technology, when we have the internet, when we have Twitter, when we have everything, it is so hard to organize. And yet, those people did not have all those instantaneous modes of control. She talked about Jabu. I had to think strategy. I was on strategy on a full, like she'd say things like, I had to make sure that before the police arrived, I had organized the workers so that by the time they arrived at a certain point, we'd moved. Like there are these buses that you probably have seen about, they call them popopos. These popopos are mostly run by Indians in Durban. She said you should run across the factory, turn them around, get them to get off, some passengers off the bus, turn them around and said, pick up the workers before the police arrive. And then they will lead the workers to Bolton Hall. And she would say, Usutu. Usutu is almost like a mantra, but basically it's projecting, it's one of our Zulu ways of saying power unite. So there are so many stories, even in the factory, as David has alluded to some. But one of the most powerful ones for me that she once told me was that when they first came to work, there was a man who used to stand by the factory and would use a shambok to count the workers. So as we came in, a shambok is if you saw the state of emergency in the 80s in South Africa, they were using these pipe-like weapons which they used to control the crowds. They are lethal. One strike will just split your skin. And this is something that was used to count the workers as they were going to start work. And Mom said workers would just be trying to duck. And then Mom said when you got to her, she just stood there and she grabbed it and she lashed back at the man. And that was basically how she introduced herself, to say, I am here and we are here to fight. So it was really, really interesting stories about Mom. And some of them, if you talk about it, because it's almost taboo to see the type of fighting, because we are living in a world that is run by bureaucracies and they don't believe in workers taking power. We are embroiled in the same struggle as we speak in Oxford, but we have entered that scene in Oxford and we have changed perception. I am a city councillor in Oxford. I am the first black woman to become a city councillor in England, in South Africa. We have entered the chambers of the city council in Oxford, and we have changed the makeup of the chamber. There was no black people in the cabinet, and we have pushed, and we have put a few black, even though it's always the token blacks, but it has changed the makeup of Oxford. We have challenged the Statue of Rhodes. We are challenging the Oxford University. We have led the Black Lives Matter resistance in Oxford, and we have formed international solidarities with all sorts of people around the world. So this moment here that I have been invited for is so significant in our struggle, global struggle against capitalism. It is so significant to show that once upon a time in 1973, workers that had no resources, who were not armed with any weapons, challenged a regime that was the most oppressive regime, the most, I would call, vulgar regime to ever exist, which engaged in a stream of torture on a massive scale, which was buried just to get things going. Anyway, I won't go into that. But my position here is to try and say the struggle goes on. We will never give up, wherever we are. It doesn't mean that 1973 was over. We have to create more 1973s for our workers. As John Durban was just alluding to, privatization, the casualization of workers, the commodification of our education. Right now in England, for the first time, we have a strike, nurses are striking, something that has never happened in history. There are unions coming from all directions. We've got Unite, we've got the CW from the postal workers, we've got what you call the GMB, we've got all sorts of unions. They are all coming out on strike. The RMT. Right now, it's the right of the Labour Party, the right wing of the Labour Party, because we do have sections in the Labour Party, have stopped our MPs, which are mostly would have been under the Jeremy Corbyn, section, to go on strikes. They've said no to MPs, but we have defined that. And as councillors in Oxford, we are going on picket lines. We are going, we're showing workers that we are with you, even though our leader has told us that he will not agree to those strikes. But I have said, I know my roots, I know where I come from, and I don't cross the picket line. So thank you. Amanda!